All right, welcome to a very special edition of Taking Inventory. This is the first of a brand new series we're doing, which is called the Snap Mafia Edition. If you have listened to this podcast, or if you know me, you probably know how much I believe in the team that was built at Snapchat over the years. I think it's like a talent density unlike kind of like anything else that's been out there. I think it's totally undervalued, to be totally honest, but I'm obviously biased. And so we wanted to start doing a monthly podcast into the awesome companies that friends of ours from Snap are building. There are way more of these companies than you know about, doing incredible things. And today we have our first episode. Danny, you want to give the intro?
Yeah, we thought, where better to start than one of the people that sent one of the first 10 snaps ever. So we invited today Dante DiCicco, one of the first 10 snaps, one of the earliest employees, built a lot of things at that company. Dante, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you having me. And, back when I first sent the first few snaps, it was actually called Pickaboo. So dating myself, but, going way back.
Well, why don't we talk about that? I mean, the origin story of Snap. Like, tell us your experience in seeing it for the first time, and then we'll get into, you actually joining Snap as an employee, not just a user.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of origin story of Snap, folks that were, the two founders of Snap, Evan and Bobby. Evan was 1 year younger than me. Bobby was 1 year older than me. We were all classmates at Stanford. And back during when we were in school, it was at a time when Facebook was just becoming prominent with folks from really day one of college. I think, I started college in the fall of 2007, may have been kind of one of the first cohorts to where everyone was on Facebook at that time. And so fast forward to when we're in junior and senior year, and you're kind of starting to realize, wait a minute, like all the fun photos and videos we're taking with our friends are kind of permanent. They're kind of just living on Facebook. And, you have all these pictures from freshman year and maybe a little embarrassing because now everyone's looking for a job. So there's kind of this like budding, desire from people our age for ephemerality on the internet to still communicate with your friends, but do it in a way that's more in the moment and in a way that's really more authentic and mimics real world interaction. And then with the iPhone launching in 2007, by 2009, 10, 11, everyone had an iPhone then. So kind of this convergence of everything on mobile combined with the need for ephemerality were kind of just the overall factors that really inspired the starting of Snapchat with two of our good friends, and then kind of the rest is history.
When I obviously want to get into all the work you've done and all the cool stuff you did at Snap and also now at Zitti, but like can you even fathom how big this thing has gotten, given like when you were one of those first 10 people using Snap, like, or whatever it was called?
I don't think anyone could have truly fathomed how big it would get. I think that the first time it really resonated with me how big it was getting was probably around Christmas time, New Year's break, 2011. I was in New York working in investment banking at the time, came home. And, at the time, most of the users of Snapchat were either my college friends, like folks that went to Stanford within like 2 or 3 years of each other, or some people in LA, because that's where Evan and Bobby went to really start building the company in its early days. And when I came home that holiday break, I realized that a handful of my friends from home, from Fresno, that had zero connection whatsoever to my friends from Stanford and from LA were using Snapchat pretty actively. And that's when I realized, okay, there's really something here. Now there's people that I know are in a completely different friend graph, are basically daily active users. And that was really cool to see.
And so was that the moment you were like, all right, I got to get out of investment banking. I got to go talk to Evan and Bobby and like, I'm going to go help build this thing with them?
It fluctuated because I think the first cohort of folks that started Snapchat as full-time employees were around 2 years younger than me, kind of class of 2013, because that was when, they first started to raise that venture money and started to hire people. So really in that like 2013 timeframe, I was pretty far down the path in investment banking in New York. And I'd kind of thought like, if Snapchat ever starts to really get serious around building a business, building corporate strategy, finance functions and stuff, that would be super interesting to me. And I kept in close touch with the founders. And then a couple years later, they hired a guy who was all of our former bosses, Imran, from Credit Suisse, and he was the global head of tech banking there. And at the time, I was working at BlackRock, and I felt, if I was at Credit Suisse with Imran, he probably would have been 10 levels above me. And so the opportunity to work directly for someone like that, learn from him, but in the context of my friend's company, which is Snapchat, was just an incredible convergence of things. And then hence I was one of the first folks on the corporate strategy team, and then did a lot of other things there over a 7-year time span.
I can't but not like laugh, and only people who worked with all of us will think this is funny, but the idea of full circle of Emron's little Bitmoji popping up in Snapchat, like talking to you from it starting with you at Stanford to that is like a pretty hysterical.
The full
vision.
circle from me in college when it first started to Imran is typing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think and Dante's extremely humble, as anyone who knows him knows this, but Dante basically figured out most of like the Discover strategy. You launched India for Snap. I don't even know how many countries you launched for Snap, but like give people just a little bit of color of all the stuff you really did.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started at Snap, we had launched Discover about a month before, I believe, 1 or 2 months before, and there were about 11 or 12 channels at the time. It was some of that early cohort of publishers we'd worked with. And we had done a few experimental ad campaigns, but it was really in the form of branded stories. I think there was like a Bud Light story or something like that. And so, as we were really thinking through our monetization strategy, what became very clear is we want to leverage the partnerships we've created on the content side to create digital advertising inventory. At the time it was called 3V ads, or mobile video ads, now called Snap ads, and really leverage our partners' digital ad sales teams to sell to their advertisers. So an example would be if you had a live story of an NFL game, you have your ad inventory in there, and you're getting the NFL sales team to package that inventory up in their other digital offerings like NFL.com and other stuff to their advertising partners. And because we didn't have much of a sales team, that was when Imran and Ben Schwerin basically threw me as a solo on that project to really craft a strategy to enable our partners to sell Snap inventory on our behalf. And so that, resulted in, I was basically helping, the folks, Nick Bell, Ben Schwerin, Josh Stone, Juan, all those early guys on crafting the content deals. But then I was essentially shot out of a cannon to help enable and educate the sales teams of every partner that we had. As our sales team got built up, it then ended up being a kind of a dual function of product marketing for content with our sales team and sales enablement there. And then how that led into international growth was we built our presence in the US pretty big by the end of 2015. And then starting in 2016, we were starting to craft our international growth strategy. And one of the first things we would do in any new market was to strike local content partnerships into localized content. So in the UK, getting like the BBC and Sky on board, right? And then in France, getting local content in French and rinse, repeat in all these other countries. So in order to do that, it was really the identical playbook that I had done in the US the year before, which is educate the French sales teams for these publishers to sell Snap to their French advertisers. And then as we grew our sales team, I would help to train them up on how to sell our own content there too. So my role kind of in partner sales, content monetization, kind of organically transformed into international revenue growth. And I was kind of on the front lines of every market that we launched in, starting, mainly in the UK and France in 2016, and then getting into the Middle East, Australia, India, Japan, Korea, kind of in my later years of the company.
Yeah, you talking about that, it brings back memories. I think the first 6 months I was at Snap, so early 2016, I thought you lived like in London or Paris, because I think I saw you more in those markets than I ever saw you in Venice, California. And I was like, what does this guy do? But like, I'm kind of, my mind's a little blown because you're like mid-20s, maybe mid to late 20s. You're leading this giant project for the company, real commercial impact. You've got a big team. You're flying all over the world. Like, you said you were thrust into it, but like you got to figure it out, and you figured it out. Like, it was a big piece of the business. Like, how did you just like figure this thing out working with the biggest brands in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it was a few things. I think one, it's an interesting dynamic when your bosses are figuring things out as you are too, right? Obviously, when I was coming from BlackRock, I always viewed like my bosses as being all knowing in our subject matter, and I was learning from them. Then we come to Snapchat, we're all figuring out together. So on one side, it sort of leveled the playing field because no one had really done this before. And then the fact that I had been using the product since basically day one of it being founded, I actually knew the product itself better than almost anyone, right? So when you combine deep product knowledge with a new business model that we're all figuring out, it sort of leveled the playing field given that I was 26 years old and I started at Snap. Then on top of that, surrounding myself with the right people was so critical. I ended up being fortunate enough to interact with very senior executives at the media companies that we were working with. Some of them have become friends and mentors of mine over the years. So I learned a tremendous amount from them. Then also hiring people on our team as well. The first person I hired was a colleague of mine at BlackRock, Anmol Malhotra, who is now still at Snap running global sports for them. And so, him having that finance background, strategy background, really just a very trusted colleague and really close friend was a huge starting point. But then after that, the next two people I hired were people who did my exact same role at YouTube and at Twitter, both of who were 5+ years older than me and had 10 years of experience doing this. And so that was when I really had to look to myself and be like, do I want to hire a team of people that are more junior than me that are just going to like not really help me learn? Or am I going to hire people that are in this area, more experienced than me, more seasoned than me, older than me, probably looking at me saying, how am I reporting to this person? But thankfully, I had the backing of Imran and Ben Schwerin, who were incredibly supportive at the time. And I learned so much from the people I hired. I think they learned a lot from me because they weren't necessarily Snapchat power users when they started. And it ended up being like the start of something great where we were kind of combining deep internal product knowledge with, the collective expertise of companies like YouTube, Google, and Twitter, who had done content monetization a lot longer than we had.
Speaking and switching gears a little bit, but speaking of deep product knowledge, let's maybe talk about Zitti, which is your company now. Can you just share with listeners like why you care so much about the restaurant industry and how you know so much about it as a Stanford Snapchat kid?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, in parallel to my entire career in finance and tech, I've been around restaurants my entire life. My family are Italian immigrants. We've owned and operated Italian restaurants in Fresno, California, the greater Central California area since 1956, so nearly 70 years. And I actually heard a family story recently about myself that because my brother had his first kid about a month and a half ago. So we're all sitting there in the waiting room and stuff. And they shared with me that I've actually been, when I was born, I went to the restaurant before I even went home. So I could literally say I've been to a restaurant before I've been to a real house in my life because my grandfather was working in the kitchen, wasn't able to make it to the hospital when I was born. My parents were leaving the hospital. I was a 10-pound baby, and they take me to the back of the kitchen in DiCicco's so my grandpa could see me, and he slipped a $100 bill in my car seat. The little Italian gift, they call it the bust. And then I went home from there. So literally does not go much deeper than the fact that I've had more exposure to restaurant kitchens than houses, or at least longer in tenure in my life. And fast forward to today, and more relevant to Zitti, towards the end of my time at Snap, so in like 2020, 2021, I decided to open the first third generation DiCicco's in my entire family. So kind of the more modern era, there's around 12, 13 DiCicco's total throughout greater Central California. It's really my father and his generation are the ones running them. And the grandkids, cousins in my generation, have all kind of done other things. We're like the first generation where people are lawyers and professionals, and I have a cousin who's becoming a dentist, and we're kind of doing other things and being in the restaurant. But I felt very passionate about continuing to grow and expand the family's brand. So I ended up being the sole financer and developer of the newest restaurant in a new area of Fresno. Fresno's over 500,000 people now. It's absolutely booming. Thousands of new homes out there, and not a lot of other retail establishments there. So because DiCicco's is such a locally well-known brand, it kind of was a no-brainer. And so to work on that in parallel in my later years at Snap created a very interesting perspective, because I saw firsthand how broken particularly the food procurement process is. I saw that there was an overabundance of tech on the front of house, like things like Open Table and Resi to make reservations, and DoorDash and Uber Eats and stuff for food delivery, and then all the different POS companies out there, Toast, etc. But on the back of house, how restaurants buy their food, which is 1/3 of all sales. So for restaurants doing 3 million in sales a year, it's literally spending $1 million in food a year. And the fact that that whole space is not transparent and not really optimized and largely offline was crazy to me, especially sitting in my seat at Snap at one of the most innovative companies in the world. So what started out as a bit of a frustration during that process of developing my own restaurant, to then feeling very passionate about solving the problem, then to leaving Snap to dedicate the next phase of my career to solving that problem.
Well, can you maybe help us understand a little bit more, like the back of house? I think as restaurant goers, as consumers, we obviously understand, Open Table and Resi. Okay, we need to make a reservation. We go sit down. We order our food. Great pasta comes out, whatever it is. But like, what is the back of house? What is that process like today? And like, why hasn't it been innovated on? Like, why is it still such an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could really think of the back of house in two major categories. It's food procurement and labor. Both of those account for approximately 1/3 cost of sale. Labor is something that can be optimized to an extent, but you can't really control for labor price. You really, it's really depending on the minimum wage in whatever state that you work in. On the food side, the food supply chain is vast and complicated. The wholesale food industry is approximately a $340 billion industry just in the US, $6 trillion industry globally. But focusing just on the US here, restaurants order their food typically from food distributors. You can think of food distributors as really trucking companies. Examples are Cisco, US Foods, Gordon, Performance Food Group. If you walked outside in LA for 10 minutes, you'll probably see a truck on any major street making a delivery to a local restaurant. Those food distributors are buying their food from thousands of manufacturers across the country, some local, some large. So even think of like Tyson chicken, for example, right? For a chicken dish to get in a consumer's hands at a restaurant, right? You're ordering chicken from the restaurant. The restaurant probably ordered that chicken from maybe a Cisco, US Foods, or Gordon. Cisco, US Foods, or Gordon bought that chicken in bulk from maybe a Tyson chicken, right? The end manufacturer. Now I'm oversimplifying it, but Tyson chicken the manufacturer sets their price. Then the distributor sets their price. And that's the price the restaurant ends up paying. The issue here is every food distributor's product catalog is completely different. From a tech perspective, think of it as just all unstructured data, right? One food distributor could call chicken one thing, another one could call it something else. They're all charging the products by the case, but one could define a case as 3 pounds, the other one could define a case as 7.5 pounds. So if you're the restaurant, it's hard to even compare prices by case, let alone cross-reference their product catalogs. And most restaurants on average work with 5 to 10 food distributors. So you could already see how something that's such a big percentage of their cost is becoming a bit of a mess. And so the ability to structure all that data, make it as easy as possible to interact with, and then to make actionable decisions off of is so critically important. And then what we later found is that food distributors are really racing to the bottom to win the business of large chains like McDonald's and Chipotle and stuff. They'll run those businesses on like a 1%, sub 1% margin. Whereas independent restaurants, like my family's, call it sub 10, 20 locations, they have profit margin targets of 25 to 30% on those guys. So they're really gouging the independent restaurants, and the independent restaurants are essentially subsidizing their race to the bottom to win businesses with the large chains. It should be the opposite if you look at the actual cash that both sit, right? So, and part of it is economies of scale, but also part of it is just lack of transparency and the lack of ability to negotiate prices properly. And that's really the tools and the information that Zitti's putting in the hands of independent restaurant operators, is to see everything super clearly, bring transparency to this industry, gain market insight, make the smartest decisions for their business at the point of ordering every single time. And that alone can result in substantial cost savings and money right back in their pocket and adding to their profitability.
And, I think just for anyone listening, so today actually, Zitti just announced something called Chat Z, which is basically taking all this stuff that Dante's talking about and using AI. So you can literally now, as a restaurant owner, get access to all this information and literally ask what should my chicken costs be? I mean, it's kind of one of the most unique uses of vertical AI and LLMs that I've seen. And, Dante just, again, so super humble, he won't share, but he's backed by Serena Williams as one of his investors, the former president of Foursquare. It's an amazing group of investors and angels that have been along for the Zitti ride. I guess, could you maybe just about Chat Z in particular, just kind of explain, I probably butchered, good use of butchered.
No, you nailed it. So really you could think of Chat Z, if I were to put, a tagline, your AI sous chef, right? Where large restaurant chains have entire supply chain teams crunching numbers, trying to make sense of the procurement process. Independent restaurants have nothing. So to have a digital procurement assistant, really an AI chatbot that you can ask questions to, such as, what are my main produce products? Which vendors have the best prices on my produce products? What are the market prices of these? How could I discover new costs of beef? Things like that are very common questions restaurants are asking or want to ask. That information has not historically been accessible to them. Zitti was already doing something that had never been done before, which is compare prices across all your distributors in real time on mobile. But that's a lot of information. And we really feel that, right? Even someone like me that, has been around big data my entire career, I'm saying this is a lot of information to digest. So now to have an AI tool built on LLMs that's synthesizing all of our first party data that we've collected through the core usage of our product over the last year and a half in the form of a very easy AI assistant for food procurement is going to absolutely change the game for these restaurants. And even some of the early feedback we've had for our beta customers over the last month or so has been just mind blown, because these guys are like, this is information that either takes them hours to find, or they don't even bother looking because they know it's too difficult. And now they can just chat conversationally, ask a question that's critically important to their procurement activities, and then take action on it to save on their food costs. It's been really inspiring to see.
And, it's a market that you've described. I mean, from total volume is massive. I mean, you walk down the street, 80% of the shops are some kind of food service. So how do you get this in the hands of the businesses and actually help them understand it? Because like you said, this is an old school business. These are people, I'm sure, like your grandfather, that just want to make good food, want to, bring happiness to people's lives. They don't want to manage this complex stuff. So how do you get it in their hands and help them understand, this can actually save you money, it can make your life easier, it can do all these things. You just need to maybe take some time and understand it a little.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the restaurant industry is a very in-person focused industry, right? And what we are doing is very disruptive to the current status quo on the procurement side, right? The status quo of just accepting what prices your distributors quote to you and not really asking questions and overpaying for your food substantially. Because it's so communal, word of mouth matters a lot, right? And that's been very cool to see in places like LA, my hometown of Fresno, the Bay Area, where we've seen a lot of, word of mouth and positive movement on that side for Zitti. Also, though, the last, call it 5 years have really seen an explosion in POS companies like Toast and Toast like, I will say, and call it workflow automation companies to help restaurants manage their inventory, manage their labor all in one place, really to kind of digitize some of the functions that they're doing manually. So when you think about layering Zitti onto that experience and say, not only look at your inventory digitally as opposed to a clipboard, but now actually take that inventory, optimize price, place orders, and converse all that through conversational AI, that is something that right now we have an opportunity to embed with some of these workflow automation platforms that are already out there and have deep penetration in the restaurant space today. So the cool part about that is some of these bigger companies have kind of already done the heavy lifting of acquiring a lot of restaurant customers, but they don't have the technical capabilities that we have on the ability to connect to distributor product catalogs, structure all that data, and then make it more accessible through AI. So we're right now in deep discussions with a handful of these larger tech companies that service tens of thousands of restaurants. We've actually already executed our first deal with one of them as of last Friday, which is super exciting. So that unlocks a whole nother distribution channel for Zitti that we're incredibly excited about. And it also allows us to meet the restaurants where they are, because a big part of our mission is to help make restaurants' lives simpler, but still impact their business. And so the ability to meet them where they are in a POS platform or workflow automation tool that they're already using, but now to turbocharge it by adding Zitti in there is super exciting.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I'm like such a big believer, and I think like I've seen the product demoed like 20 times over the last month as it's evolved, in particular Chat Z, and it really it is like one of the coolest use cases I've seen of AI, and it has like such real world implications for these businesses. So it is it's very inspiring, and I'm pumped to see what you do with all this. I guess before we let you go, just given that this edition is about the Snap Mafia, for any friends that used to work at Snapchat and are thinking about starting a company, what advice would you give them so they do, and we can get them on this podcast?
Absolutely. So first off, I would say solving a personal problem is so critical, right? A problem that is just very near and dear to something you care about personally. It doesn't have to be something that you've encountered in your career. Like for me, like I never touched restaurants or food businesses while I was at Snap, but it was a problem that I cared deeply about personally. So I think that is a big deal, because if it's a problem you care about personally, that's going to propel you through the natural highs and lows, pivots, et cetera, you have in starting the company. So that's one. Two, I would say to really leverage the collective wisdom and community of the Snap Mafia and Snap alums. And that's not necessarily, the folks out there thinking about starting a company, not even if you're in LA, right? The LA folks will definitely support you 100%, but there's also a deep Snap network in New York, in London, and kind of all over the world. And I'm a really firm believer that because Snapchat is such a creative company, it really bred very unique alums who think of things in a different way. And I think that's, part of the feedback I've gotten from Zitti is like, you're thinking about food procurement in a completely different way than any of these other restaurant tech companies ever have before, because you're coming at it from a different perspective. And I think that Snap alums have the opportunity to do that in any industry that they care personally about. So then the third thing I would say is just do it, right? Like just take the jump. Taking the plunge is probably the single hardest part, because once you take the plunge, things start to, build on themselves, and there's that domino effect. And there is such a strong community around with the Snap alumni. So I think just taking the plunge and jumping in is something I would encourage anyone if they're considering doing it. They definitely will not regret it.
Okay, thanks, Dante. I mean, that's good advice for anyone, not even just kind of Snap Mafia. But if people want to learn more about Zitti, want to learn more about you, where can they follow you? Where can they see ZChat and more?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can, if they first want to learn more, contact me directly. Feel free to send me a DM on Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm really responsive on that side of things. Our website has a lot of great information. Zitti's first employee, Perrin, was a rock star designer, and so the product looks slick, the website looks slick, and it has a lot of good information there. And I'd also say if any of the listeners out there have friends, colleagues, family that are in the restaurant business, right? Whether they're investors of restaurant groups or operators of restaurant groups or just have close friendships of restaurant groups, we'll love to have the opportunity to chat with them and see how Zitti could potentially help increase their profitability and save on their food costs as well.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for doing this, and congrats on the launch of ZChat. I can't wait to see where it is like a year from now. I think it's going to be massive.
You got it. Thank you guys so much. Keep killing it on the Taking Inventory podcast. I'm a loyal listener, and it's been awesome.
Thanks, buddy.